Election day is almost upon us. Who will the next mayor be in Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Middletown, and elsewhere? Straight ahead on Face the State, we'll get analysis from Kevin Rennie. Also, how is the state's debt diet impacting cities and towns? And what will the battle over tolls be like in 2020? State Representatives Laura Devlin, a Republican, and Roland Lamar, a Democrat, are with us. Plus, the end of an era. The man whose name became synonymous with Connecticut public broadcasting is moving on. A walk down memory lane with John Dankosky. It is all straight ahead this last Sunday of the month, October 27th, 2019.
From Eyewitness News, Connecticut's most watched local political program, this is Face the State.
It's 8:30. Good morning. I'm Dennis House. Thanks for watching Face the State. 9 days until Election Day, and it is an off year, yet there are some interesting races out there. With us today, Hartford Current columnist Kevin Rennie of Daily Ructions. And Kevin, good to see you back here on the program.
Thank you, Dennis.
So what do you think is the biggest municipal race in our state next week?
I think New Haven is the biggest. The result doesn't seem to be in doubt, but that's a big change for Tony Harp, who's been in public office for over 30 years in New Haven, losing for the first time in that long career a primary last month. And now, although she says she's reviving her campaign at the end as a Working Families Party candidate, it seems quite unlikely that she can prevail against Justin Elliker, who won the primary in September by a significant margin. And this is a rematch from 6 years ago, and he did pretty well as an independent against her in the general election. He tracks a fair amount of unaffiliated support, and they'll be participating in November, so he's likely to prevail by a larger margin than he did in the primary.
We've invited both of them on Face the State next week. I know Mr. Elliker's coming. We're still waiting to hear from Mayor Harp. Why do you think she decided to reverse course and not endorse him? Because Senator Murphy endorsed him and Governor Lamont endorsed him. There's a lot of pressure, and yet she decided to trudge on.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because her primary campaign was not very good, and there's no reason to think that now, without the help of the Democratic organization, which is formidable in New Haven, and which she did have significant support from them, she was the endorsed candidate, it's got to be a lot harder going it alone in these last 2 weeks. That seems well. I think that there are people who are in politics for most of their adult life, and they have a hard time exiting gracefully. And it's become such a big part of your life that you can't let it go.
Let's talk about Hartford. Eddie Perez is also continuing on after losing the primary to Luke Bronin.
Well, if he is, he's not leaving many footprints. So he didn't have much money. It's a very quiet race, yes.
But he had the option of getting off that ballot.
Yes, yeah, you do. You do have the option of getting off, and his is some sort of race for mayor and redemption campaign in the light of his conviction for corruption, and he left office 10 years ago. And of course, you could say the same thing about Joe Ganim in Bridgeport, and it's an odd place to seek this sort of absolution from the public.
So in terms of Perez, why do you think that he would hang in after losing the primary? Wouldn't it make more sense to support the Democratic nominee and maybe next time around?
Maybe, but I think these resentments and rivalries start to run deeper and deeper, and Hartford's politics is completely Democratic, and it gets very fractious. And I think that people belong to factions, and oftentimes within their parties, they're never reconciled.
What about Bridgeport? Joe Ganim up for re-election, Marilyn Moore, who didn't really handle it very well in terms of getting on that ballot.
She could have petitioned her way onto the Working Families line, failed to do that, lost the primary narrowly, and is now in court over really trying to have the primary results overturned. And it's been a long trial. There should be a decision by the Superior Court judge who heard the case in the next few days. And whatever that result is, either side will appeal it, likely to the Supreme Court. But the issue over absentee ballots is one that it's very rare for a Superior Court judge to overturn what appears to be the will of the voters, in this case in a Democratic primary, without overwhelming evidence of some kind of fraud, and to also show that that fraud was decisive in the result of the contest.
Do you think that Gadam's run for governor hurt him among people in Bridgeport?
I do. I think, he 4 years ago he made a pledge to, as he ran for mayor of Bridgeport, that he was really devoted to the welfare of Bridgeport and improving life in Bridgeport. And then he took a long time off, really, to run for governor. You can't run for governor part-time, and had a terrible showing, as everyone expected he would.
What about some of the smaller cities, Middletown and New Britain?
Middletown is interesting because there's Dan Drew, the incumbent's not running again, and I think you could say that Ben Florsheim's victory in a four-way Democratic primary last month was a surprise. He's running against Republican Seb Giuliano, who was the mayor before Dan Drew. So he has probably a lot more name recognition than Ben Florsheim, but I understand the Florsheim people are working very hard, and Seb Giuliano seemed to take the summer off as the Democrats were battling. Now, Bridgeport is another place where there are a lot of factions within the Middletown Democratic Party. If Ben Florsheim has been able to reunite them around his candidacy, he'll probably win. But if he has not, then Seb Giuliano could be returning as mayor of Bridgeport.
And what about New Britain? Obviously, Erin Stewart has her eye on a higher office down the road.
Yes, certainly. She seems to have consolidated her base there, and I think she's expected to win again. There is in some of these communities, like in Greenwich, where there's an opening for first selectman, which is an important position in Greenwich. Greenwich has been Republican for a long time, but it's changing, and it's changing in the aftermath of Donald Trump being elected president. As in suburbs across the nation, people who voted Republican won't do that anymore, and so we'll see if there are voters, enough of them, who say I'm not going to vote for any Republican. That seemed to be the case last year in congressional and state elections, and Greenwich will be an interesting test of that.
So you're saying President Trump's a factor. What about Governor Lamont?
I don't think so. I don't think he's been in office long enough, and he hasn't. For instance, the tolls, which has sort of become his signature issue, the tolls haven't been enacted and haven't been imposed, certainly on drivers, so that. Although his approval numbers are not very high, I don't think there's the sort of visceral feeling that there came to be with Dan Malloy very early on.
So if you don't live in one of these towns, but you know some of these names, who else do you see running for higher office down the road? We know Erin Stewart, possibly run for governor in 2022?
Possibly. She'd have to get through a campaign in 2021 again if she decided to
not to run in 2020,
or decided not to run.
Focus on
right. Certainly, Luke Bronin I think still has his eye on some sort of higher office. There may be a little bit of a logjam with so many younger, new. Statewide and prominent Democratic elected officials. I mean, there's sort of a dearth of talent among the Republicans, but lots of ambitious elected officials among the Democrats.
Good enough. All right, Kevin Rennie, Hartford Courant. We'll see you on election night right here on Channel 3. In a moment, 2 state lawmakers on tolls, the debt diet, and more. And we invite you to watch past editions of Face the State right now on our YouTube channel or our app.